Welcome to the Cherwell iTicket change flow and draft status video. During this video, we will walk through the process of change management workflow and how it relates to iTicket. In the change management workflow, not every status is used for every type of change. As an example, infrastructure change would bypass development and testing, and an emergency change would bypass development, testing, and potentially implementation planning since it's an emergency. That doesn't mean that if there's an emergency, there wouldn't be any planning. Instead, it allows the flexibility of the planning to be documented after the fact in an emergency situation. In a standard change, the flow would start with draft, move to development, then testing, then into implementation planning, which is a new phase that has been added just recently. From there, it would move on to platform approval. After platform approval, the change may require that it be reviewed by the CAB or Change Advisory Board. The reason for the review may include high or critical risk or off-cycle deployments. Items that need CAB review need to be at the CAB review stage by noon on Monday, so that they can be reviewed at the CAB on Tuesday. Items that are standard risk or tied to a release generally do not require CAB approval. This is because they have greater oversight or lower risk. Next is the implementation stage, where the plans created in the implementation planning stage are executed. This execution is created by following the tasks that were created in earlier stages. After all tasks are completed, the change moves to the verification stage. The verification stage is new and requires someone other than the implementer to verify that the implementation has been done correctly. Generally, this would be the business requester, so that the business's needs can be verified to have been met. In the case of infrastructure, someone else on the infrastructure team, such as the lead or another team member, should verify that the system was implemented correctly. After verification approval, the change moves to the closure phase. At this point, the change owner closes the ticket and the change is complete. Next up, we will do a deeper dive into the change management workflow in the draft stage and how it works in Cherwell iTicket. What does a change owner have to do? The change owner does follow-up of the change as it progresses through, creates some of the tasks in the change, checks on approvers to make sure that they have approved work, works on the schedule, updates dates and times, gets the business to verify in the end stages, and finally closes out the change and makes sure that it's all well documented. During the draft stage, the change owner creates the title, description, primary dates, reason for change, primary CIs are picked, and other items are entered into the Cherwell iTicket system. Now we will switch to iTicket or Cherwell to create an example standard change ticket. First, move to the top menu that says New and select New Change Requests, or you can press Ctrl-Shift-C if you prefer keyboard shortcuts. When the change screen is refreshed, you will see the change number has been created. You will also note that your name has been added to the Assigned as Requester area. However, this is generally not the case, as the change owner and the change requester should generally not be the same person. I've updated the requester to be a business person. Please note that the change owner section, Owned by You, is expected, since the change owner generally is the person who initiates the change request. However, in this example, I'm going to assign the change to someone else. One enhancement that's been made is that the number at the top of the screen can now be highlighted and copied. A simple but useful change that allows you to grab the change number and email it out to others. Also at the top, the date created has been added to the top of the screen. The emergency or exception box has been reworded to include exceptions to the normal release cycle. The checkbox no longer automatically raises risk. However, using the emergency exception box will automatically trigger review by the CAB. As you can see in the change management workflow, checking the emergency exception box changes the workflow to bypass the requirement for development, testing, and implementation planning and allows it to move directly to platform approval. This is one reason additional post-implementation review is required. This checkbox is intended to be an exception to the process and should not be used unless exceptional circumstances require it. Next, we're required to pick the type of change that will be performed. The options are infrastructure or standard change. In this example, we will use standard change. The primary difference is that infrastructure changes don't generally require development or lend themselves to testing prior to the change being made. Therefore, the development and testing steps in the standard change process are allowed to be bypassed in an infrastructure change, as seen in the change management workflow. The next item that needs to be updated in Cherwell is the reason for the change. These items have been updated slightly. The most common reason will be enhancement, followed by maintenance and break fix. After the reason for change has been selected, general service type needs to be selected. For standard change, applications would be the most common. For infrastructure, data services would include such things as servers, storage, and SQL. Network services include anything to do with the actual network, such as site-to-site connectivity or internet connectivity. Computer services include desktop and laptops. The next item that needs to be completed is the primary CI or configuration item. As per ITIL, a configuration item can be a physical or logical item. In this example, the requester does not have a direct link to the CI that is being modified. Therefore, we need to expand our search to the entire system. In this case, we are looking for JDE. In an infrastructure change, the item would be more likely a physical item, such as a server. Next, a priority should be picked. In general, the priority should be set to medium, with low reserved for items which are no rush and high reserved for items that are time critical. Regression testing is currently at the BA and platform owner's discretion during the draft phase of the change and can be added later if deemed necessary by the BA, development, platform owner, or quality assurance groups. Next, the title and description need to be added. The title should be a very brief sentence that helps to identify the change. The description should also try to be brief and descriptive, and while pasting items into these fields is appropriate, pasting the entire email into these fields can be inappropriate, since these fields are reported in multiple meetings. Remember, if you require large amounts of data for your change, you can attach documents to the change. This will be covered more extensively in the implementation and planning section. Next, the planned implementation start and end dates and times should be entered. This is a window of time in which production implementation tasks should be completed. At the draft phase, this can just be the expected date of implementation. The last required item before moving out of draft is risk, and while this may need to be updated as the change progresses, it helps to identify high-risk items in the early stages of the change. The service disruption during a regularly scheduled outage window may not be enough to raise the risk level. However, the multiple platforms of this change would require that this be considered a high-risk change. If you have any questions about risk, make sure to check with your platform owner or owners, depending upon the change. The entire Key Personnel tab is not required to be filled out. However, in this example, we will. First, the development team and primary implementing team are selected. The development team field is required to move a change from draft to development. UAT would generally be the same person or from the same group as the requester. The verification approver would also generally be from the same business unit. Verification is not that the change has been implemented, but rather that it works as designed in the specifications. The verifier should not be the implementer. In this case, there are 3 platform owners, one from JDE, one for the web interface, and one for title. Since there are multiple platforms, this change should be moved to high or critical risk. Before moving on, make sure to save your changes. A few updates can be made at any time. For example, the date and primary CI in this example needed some updating. Make sure to save your changes before moving to development, or in the case of infrastructure, moving on to implementation planning. Finally, the change must be moved out of draft by the change owner. In the case of standard change, the next step would be testing, as you can see. The status in the middle of the screen also changes to development. In the case of infrastructure, the next step would be implementation, and the current status would be implementation planning. This concludes the process flow overview and draft section video. The next video is development and testing.